Welcome everyone to the Water Data Forum. This series is focused on engaging a broad professional audience in topics relating to water data. Today's session is focused on data-driven approaches to understanding emerging contaminants or contaminants of emerging concern. This series is co-presented by the Cleveland Water Alliance, the Water Environment Federation, or WEF, and CUAHSI. My name is Julia Masterman. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for CUAHSI. CUAHSI is the consortium of universities for the advancement of hydrologic science incorporated. We're a nonprofit organization funded in part by the National Science Foundation, and our mission is to empower the water community and advance science through collaboration, infrastructure, and education. CUAHSI hosts a domain-specific repository for water science data called Hydroshare. We also host a number of webinars, trainings, fellowships, and other educational programs throughout the year. And overall are a nonprofit organization that exists to support the water science community, especially when it comes to data-related challenges. We would invite you to visit our website, join our mailing list, and reach out. We would love to connect with you. Okay, before we get started today, and we introduce our speakers, a few logistics. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Cleveland Water Alliance website. Secondly, we ask that you use the Q&A functionality to submit your questions to our speakers. You'll find the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar. Note that it's different from the chat button, and we'll be using that Q&A to field questions. Please feel free to add questions at any time. We'll do our best to get to as many as possible. And with that, let's get started. Thank you so much to the water data team at Cleveland Water Alliance and at WEF for creating this venue. I'm so excited to learn from our panelists today. Thank you for joining today. Austin Baldwin is a research hydrologist at USGS, and Dr. Wagner is a professor at Wayne State University. I'll let them introduce themselves further. But thank you both so much for joining us today. And with that, let's dive in. Stop. Screen share. All right. Could you please introduce yourself and your background in contaminants of emerging concern? Austin, you want to go first?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Austin Baldwin. I'm a research hydrologist at the USGS at the Idaho Water Science Center in Boise. I've been with USGS for about 18 or 19 years and have studied a pretty wide range of contaminants in surface waters and sediments around the country, especially the Great Lakes and in the Snake River Basin here in Idaho. These include organic contaminants, PAHs, pesticides, wastewater chemicals, pharmaceuticals. So a lot of these under the emerging contaminant umbrella, as well as mercury and other metals and microplastics. And my focus is really on understanding sources, bioavailability, and biological effects of these contaminants. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Wagner?
Hi, I'm Yongli, and I'm a professor in the Department of Civil and Environment Engineer at Wayne State University, and I'm also the director of two microplastic projects that is funded by Great Lakes Protection Fund. One of them is current project we are going on. It is mobilizing a Great Lakes microplastic action network. So my research and teaching interest is a wide area of the water quality and water treatment and contaminants of emerging concern. So particularly recent years, we have been doing a lot of work on microplastics. So my main interest it is to look at the pollution source prevention and also use data-driven to empower community to take actions.
Thanks so much. Next question is, what does the landscape of this field look like today? I guess we can keep going in the same order.
Sure. Yeah. So from my perspective, one of the big areas of research currently is trying to understand which chemicals matter the most. So there's hundreds, thousands of chemicals in the environment, and our lab methods are constantly improving to the point where we can detect hundreds of chemicals in a given sample at parts per billion of concentrations, most of these, very low concentrations. So, which of these are important? Many of these are probably don't pose much of a risk to aquatic organisms or humans, but some probably do. And, watershed managers are faced with this question of which ones do we prioritize, which ones do we, try to control the sources of or remediate for. So there's been a lot of work. One way to assess that is water quality guidelines, but water quality guidelines may only exist for 10% of the chemicals in your sample, for example. So there's some new methods, new approaches that people are using and developing to try to broaden our ability to assess the effects of these chemicals and prioritize these chemicals. So, and a lot of this work is being done by toxicologists, and I'm not a toxicologist, so I just preface that. But one of the methods that I'm using a lot is based on cellular responses to chemicals. So using these high throughput bioassays, exposing different types of cells to chemicals and looking at like sublethal effects on these cells. The advantages here are it's faster than developing like water quality guidelines, which are done on whole organisms, and have some concerns there. These cellular approaches are faster, they're cheaper, they're more humane, and they provide information on these potential sublethal effects, which these whole organism exposures don't provide. So I think it's a pretty exciting development in the last, I'd say, 8 to 10 years. It's really been ramping up, and it's really changing the landscape of how we can evaluate and prioritize chemicals of emergent concern.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think right now there are so many, there's many chemicals out there in the environment, and some of those chemicals are out there for a long time, but just recently, in the recent years, like that's why I call that chemical of emerging concern. It's not because that they are not there before, it's just because that we just realize that their impact on our ecological and human health. So with that many of chemicals out there, I think prioritize that. That's really the first step to see like what kind of chemical that will make most significant impact on our ecological and human health. And I also want to say what's next level, it is to develop some like needs standard and criteria for risk assessment. So basically, for example, we know that PFAS microplastics are out there. We also know there is some evidence, there is some correlation between the human health and those chemicals out there. However, I think there is a lot unknown about at what level, at what concentration, at what kind of exposure level that's matter. So I think there is still a lot of work needs to be done, and we need a lot of data to set up those criteria and standard. Another point I also want to add, it is I'm always interested in pollution prevention. It's because we know that those chemicals, any type of those chemicals, once they are out there, it's so challenging to clean up. So basically, it's like you collect a needle from the sea, like the microplastics, PFAS, they are so tiny. Like microplastics is so tiny. So once they are there, it's very hard to remove them. So I think it's most important it is to prevent them enter into the environment from the very beginning. So again, that is also needs data supported. For example, what it is major pollution sources and pathways. So with all those that to be seen, I think a lot of work need to be done. But good sense is many work has started to look into those things.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your two different approaches to this field. So thank you. So relating to that, what data-related limitations, risks, or barriers currently limit the ability to understand the emerging contaminant that you work on?
Yongli, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, we can take a turn. uh, as I said first, I think there's a lot of progress out there. There's many research and study published. There's many data available, but there's still some limitation and challenges there. I would want to say one of the big limitation or challenging for take microplastic as example, since I'm working on that a lot. So the microplastic itself is very complicated. So their impact on human health and ecological health is not just depends on the size. Basically, their size matter, their shapes matter. So typically, the smaller size, that means the more biologically significance that could be on human health and ecological health. So if the microplastic is basically smaller than 20 micrometer, that's recommended by WHO, that's World Health Organization. When it's smaller than 20 micrometer, that is mostly biologically relevant because that's easier to enter our human body and then penetrate our organ to cause all those adverse impact. So size matter and shapes matter as well. And another complication of the microplastic, it is chemical compositions because there are so many additives that in microplastic. So we also need to understand the chemical property of those plastics. And to make it more complicated, it is the plastics. It is because they have a microplastic, they have a large surface area, so they can easily absorb other contaminants like other chemicals, like persistent chemicals, heavy metals. So it's really complicated to understand how those different perspective or different property of those microplastics that can have on the ecological and the human health. I think in the recent years, there's a lot of research going on. The people use animal study or use a cellular work and use or just do like survey. You can say, I know the last 2 years, people have some evidence that found the microplastic in human blood, in human blood and in human lungs. So all those, but we still, I think the challenge it is with that complicated problem or those complicated issues, how to analyze all this data in the same framework, how to standardize that in what level, what concentration it matter. I think that's one of the biggest challenge there.
Yeah, I'll just add to on the microplastics topic. The lack of standardization in terms of sample collection, I think, is a big barrier. There's, people are still collecting microplastics in a lot of different ways and analyzing them in different ways, and so it's really hard to compare across studies still. I think there's been a lot of progress towards standardizing, but I think we still have a little ways to go on that front.
That's great. Yeah. I also want to add another comment about like the pollution sources, since I'm always interested in that. Like microplastic, they can come from various pollution sources, and like the primary plastics that's typically used in a lot of industry, like used in industry as abrasive, like washing solution, and also that's primary. It's basically those plastic is intentionally made in a micro size or nano size. And another source is secondary sources. So basically secondary sources that's break down from large pieces. So for example, those plastic debris that are left out in the environment and after a certain period, I mean, they are not going to disappear, but they just break down to smaller and smaller particles that we cannot see. They are still there. So with so many, and also the sources could come from like point sources, non-point sources. So there are so many pollution source and pathways. I think another challenge is also we need some data or data-driven approach to how to more efficiently to manage those plastic pollution.
Yeah, one more limitation related to like water quality guidelines is basically the lack of water quality guidelines for so many of the chemicals that are out there. So in some of the recent studies I've been involved with, some of the most frequently detected chemicals, we have no water quality guidelines or toxicity information for. So it's really hard to know, like, well, this chemical is everywhere, but does it matter? So again, kind of going back to my earlier response, the lack of water quality guidelines is a limitation.
Yeah, thanks. I hadn't even thought about the porous nature of the microplastics holding other contaminants. That's
Yes.
another interesting dimension I hadn't considered before as well.
Yeah, that's why it's so complicated. I know there's research they found like the microplastic the surface because it's I mean the particles itself is small, but the surface area, basically the smaller particles, they have a larger surface area. So they can easily absorb like metals. They found the metals and other persistent like chemicals absorbed and microplastic. So when it's enter into environment or human body, so that also take those carry. It's like a vector. So basically, it's like vector to carry other things.
Yeah. Wow. All right. I guess in your view, if it could be implemented at scale, what would have the largest impact towards addressing the challenges you see now? We touched a little bit about water quality standards and some identifying sources, but in terms of next steps, what do you think what would have the largest impact?
Well, at risk of sounding like a broken record, I'll go back to knowing the toxicity of chemicals and chemical companies being more accountable for the onus being on the chemical companies rather than on, for example, like EPA or regulatory bodies after the fact. So right now, a chemical company can basically create a new chemical and put it in their product, and then we start to see it in the environment, and then we have to determine, like, is it harmful or not? And it's a game of constant catch up that we're hopelessly losing because there's so many chemicals being developed, and the rate of that is so much higher than the rate of being able to test these chemicals on the back end, and especially in the current environment, there's just not a lot of interest or money to test all these chemicals.
Yep.
So I also I think that's with all those chemicals out there, I think like one of the probably largest impact that we can do it is empower people's action. So that's actually one of our project is trying to do is basically to collect and analyze the data, and then use those data, analyze the results to communicate with public and with communities, and then surely we need to engage in different stakeholders at different level, right? Like in corporation, industry, government. But I think first thing at least we can do it is from each individual. I think I can say a very positive sign or positive trend is like talking plastics and microplastic. There's a lot more and more people increasingly realize the impact of those things, and then they are willing to take action. So we have been working with many community partners to basically to public outreach, education, and then use our expertise, and then to communicate with our community partners, because a lot of our community partners, when I communicate with them, they are willing to take actions. So they are willing to go out to talk to people, and also a lot of people show interest in, they want to contribute to reduce those pollutions, either plastics or other pollutions. I think the thing it is, with data, with information, so how we communicate with our communities and individuals, public, and different stakeholders. I think that's probably one thing that everyone can immediately doing that.
Thanks. Yeah, before we start taking questions from the Q&A, thank you. If you in the audience have any additional questions that we should go into, feel free to start posting them now. But relating to that what you just mentioned, Yongli, about that people are engaged, that when you speak with the community, people want to do something. Speaking of both of you, is there work out there that gives you hope? Are there examples of things that are going on that you see as, you know, a positive change in this area?
I can start with that since I just
Yeah.
started community work. As I mentioned, I do see. I think I'm a little optimistic. I do see a lot of positive change or positive trend in many like different level stakeholders, like public, individual, community organizations, industry. Just take an example. We have been working with many community partners. So some of them actually reach out to us. So I'm a researcher, right? So typically, sometimes I will reach out to the communities, but a lot of this work related like microplastic and plastics, many of our community partners, individual, reach out to us, say they basically send us email, hey, I know we know you are doing some microplastic analysis, microplastic monitoring. Can we join you? Like we can volunteer to do something. So that's really I think that's really an exciting sign that people and the public are really they care. So basically, they care about the environment. So take example, it is that when we just started our microplastic project last year, that's our second phase of the project. So basically, it's development data tool to understand the hotspot of the microplastic and understand what's major pollution sources and pathways in a particular locations. And we just started that, and there's multiple community partners and reach out to us. They voluntarily to join our meeting to learn about microplastics, to understanding, all right, what's microplastics. Probably some of they hear a little about it, but not much there. So they learn a lot of I mean, we learn each other, right? So we learn their communities. They learn from our experience about what microplastics, what are there, how their impact there. And also they volunteered to help us with field work. So basically we go to their work with their community partners to, all right, so for example, they bring their concerns. So for example, they think, all right, this watershed or this lake or this river, they have concerns. So they help us to go to collect those samples to analyze the data. And with those data, and they can communicate those data with their public in a specific communities. So, and then they can take action. So that's really, I think that's really exciting. It's exciting thing that we, as a researcher, that's I'm seeing in the past few years. Another example, it is we can also see a lot of like industry corporation responsibility and initiative they are taking. Just take example, we attend a recycling conference in May. We talk to like there are a lot of industry, like startup industry, they doing composting business. They come to talk to us, and also they are interested in the business for composting. They also want to learn the best management of how to reduce plastics or PFAS or other chemicals in the composting. So we really can say a lot of those positive things happening right now.
Yeah, along the lines of that corporate responsibility, I think one example is 6-ppd quinone. So if you're not familiar with this, this is a very emerging contaminant or emerging concern. It's a chemical that's put in tires to prevent them from breaking down in sunlight, and anti-ozonant. But when tires wear, this chemical wears along with it, and it eventually ends up in streams, and it's very toxic to some salmon. So it's been observed a lot in the Pacific Northwest, like Seattle and stuff like that. And tire companies are, rather than just denying this or saying it's not their fault, they're working alongside toxicologists to try to understand the mode of the toxicity and to explore alternatives to this chemical, because it serves an important role, so we can't just take it out of tires. But I think everybody recognizes that we need to find an alternative for it. So I think that's a great sign, and maybe something that we wouldn't have seen 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's cool to hear. Okay, let's take a few questions from the Q&A here. Here's the first one. Question about managing plastic pollution. Of course, reducing plastic pollution is the best option, but are there better ways to dispose of the plastic that we do have so that the microplastics are less likely to be widely distributed in water supplies and the environment? Yongli, yeah.
You're on mute.
Sorry. I'm looking at the question. I didn't realize I'm muted. So I can start the question. I can start with that. I think that's a great question. I think by generally saying manage microplastic pollution, so it's basically like the how to dispose, like better way to dispose those plastic is definitely one of the approaches or one of the way that we can better manage those plastic pollution. So it's basically it is for example for the disposal of plastic right now we do recycle, right, from waste management perspective. We do recycle. We try to recycle as much as we can. And for those that we cannot recycle, so typically they go to landfill. And then surely I think for future better management, we definitely should like increase the recycle rate and also to reduce those plastic go to landfill. I think one really important about microplastic, it is those debris, like those plastic that's just left out in the environment intentionally or unintentionally. I think it's probably related to more like education and more education or more management, because a lot of the time sometimes just left out there. And so if we go to the park, we always can see some plastic packaging out there. I think education is a key to reduce those debris out there. And also there's another, I think, again, come back to the corporation responsibility. I know for some plastic, it's really hard to recycling, like the plastic bag, like the grocery shopping bag, right? So it's really hard to recycling. It's because it will wrap up with those recycling facilities. So for managing those like non-recyclable, so it's probably the way to do is to try to reuse them. I know there are some grocery stores, they set up some bin there, so that basically you can put the grocery shopping bags back into their bin, into their grocery, and then can take back. Or also reduce the use instead of using grocery shopping bag, to use some reusable bag. Those there's a lot of management perspective and public education perspective, public behavior perspective. So it's I have to say it is a systematic approach with many perspective approaches together.
Thanks. Austin, anything you'd like to add?
I guess a couple of things that came to my mind. One is microplastics from dryer vents. Dryer vents are a pretty big source of microplastics to the atmosphere. And it's hard to eliminate that completely, but an easy thing on a personal level is just making sure you have a screen on your dryer vent. yeah, I guess that's one thing that I thought I'd add.
Yeah, that's helpful. That actually leads similarly into another question that we received. There was a recent article showing that glass containers have more microplastics than plastic bottles. Is this accurate? And what are we to use that's the safest right now? I think this question and leads to a larger question that I had, maybe for you, Yongli, about there's a lot of information out there talking about microplastics, and sometimes it can feel a little bit scaremongering. Are there What misconceptions do you see in your work with the community? And also, I mean, if you have an answer to this question as well, about the glass containers.
That's interesting. So I think I came to glimpse that article. I have not read it yet. I think I just glimpsed that article a few days ago. But be honest, I have not read the article yet. So it's one article about glass container. That's very interesting observation or very interesting research finding. I think I need more time to digest that. Without any more data, without any more data, I would not say I agree or disagree that. So that's another cases. That's another example that show why data is so important. Is because I think with one research, I need to go to look at their research methodology and the how they find those microplastic in the glass container, where they come from. The glass container, it is from the top cover, or it's from the glass itself. So I have to say that's something I cannot give any the definite answer right now for that questions. But that's definitely interesting words to go look into it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that specific study either, but I'm imagining this source of the plastic to the glass is in the bottling process when the glass bottle is open, going around in the bottling plant, and there's plastic in the air getting into it. What the solution is, I don't know. Yeah, but I think that's probably how a glass bottle is getting microplastic in it.
Yeah, thanks. There's a kind of a comment and helpful context in the Q&A from Colin. Plastic recycling facilities can be also contributors of microplastics in the ecosystem. They did a research project on PET polymer recycling, a PET polymer recycling facility, and the wastewater from the crushing, washing, and floating sinking process contained an enormous magnitude of microplastics, and many of those were irregularly shaped. Most industries are doing mechanical recycling, however, chemical recycling could be a good step.
That's great comments. That's exactly we are also trying to understand right now. As our current project going on, we do have partners from recycling industry. When we talk to them, I think one of the first things we with communication with those partners in recycling industry, with communications, with question discussions, we are also considering to look into the wastewater from recycling facility. That is actually great comments. I think we are in the same place. We have not collected data yet, but I would imagine or assume that with those mechanical washing, with those mechanical pressure, washing water, there's a highly likely that there's going to produce some microplastics in the waste washing water in recycling facility. But that's definitely worth of further investigation and further look into that.
Yeah, thanks.
That's interesting.
All right, this may be directed to you more, Austin, perhaps. Is there any government data available about the status of plastic pollution in water and/or soils across the entire United States?
No, I would, as far as I know, and I think I would know, there hasn't been any large coordinated government-funded effort to do a study like that. To do a comprehensive study of microplastics across the U.S., whether it be in water or soil or sediment. There have been some, regional or, some studies, but I would say not large government-funded studies or data sets. No. Something I've struggled with, and maybe Yongli too, like there's a lot of public interest in microplastics, like more than any other contaminant I've ever worked with. But getting funding to actually study microplastics is pretty challenging in my experience.
It is. I think I agree, Austin. I just want to add a comment there. I think that's a great question, is because I think whenever we talk about any chemicals or chemicals concerns, people first think about it is, I want to know where they are and what level they are. So basically, like that question, what is microplastic level in the soil, in our water, in our soil and water across the United States or Canada? So that's one of the main work we are doing right now. We have project funded by Great Lakes Protection Fund. I think I agree with you, Austin. It's hard to get funded from federal agency, but luckily we got some funding from some fund, Great Lakes Protection Fund. So with that funding, we just started last year. We are developing a data tool. So those data tool will including, so our idea it is to basically develop a data tool. So this data tool can collect those data that's already published out there. And then so basically we're going to extract the data from those already published papers, report. There's tons of the paper out there already published. Like they look at the microplastic in soil, in water across United States and Canada. So the first thing is going to extract those data from those published data. And then we also work with our community partners to collect the data, like from their interest. So that's our goal with that data tool developed, so we can compile those existing data and then incoming ongoing data collection. So we have a bigger picture of what those microplastic they are, where are they, where are those hot spots. So that is actually we are doing right now. Our data tool is right now is in alpha version testing. So we plan to probably launch the data tool next year. So if anyone is interested, feel free to reach out to me, and then I will be happy to share. So we'll make the data tool public probably in 1.5 years.
Great. Very exciting. All right, this question I think is aimed primarily to you, Austin. What is the timeline or process from collecting samples and determining toxicology to actually publicly defining a chemical as a contaminant and providing concentration limits?
Okay. Yeah. So this is not something I do, but I'm somewhat familiar with it. So the process for defining like a water quality guideline for a chemical is, an entity like the EPA does all kinds of testing, and they gather all kinds of data from toxicity testing, and to determine, okay, what's the concentration at which this is going to be protective of aquatic life for 95% of species tested or something like that, and then they'll set a criterion, a concentration value. So that's usually does not take into account what the concentrations are, in the environment. It's purely the toxicology question. So there's, collecting samples in the environment doesn't really factor into that usually. But seeing chemicals in the environment frequently can, sometimes trigger that process. Like in the Great Lakes, for example, we would see some chemicals frequently that didn't have water quality guidelines. And, we were working with EPA to try to get those chemicals on their list of chemicals to test. So I guess, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. If you ask that question with like additional context, please feel free to submit the clarifying question.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a question about PFAS, and I know that neither of you work specifically with PFAS, but wondering if you have additional context on this. What do you see as the most significant PFAS source and contamination pathways? What are the most promising mitigation strategies for environmental contamination?
Yeah, so I have been kind of close to some PFAS work, but haven't done a lot myself. There are so many sources of PFAS to the environment. From our clothing to like food wrappers to, a big source, a big like point source is firefighting foam. So like Air Force bases are commonly contaminated areas. But I honestly don't know, like, if you tried to parse out contributions from all these different sources, what source is the primary source? I haven't seen that, and I can't give an answer on that.
Yep. Sorry, Kathy. We're not able to, but that's a great question. And maybe future webinars we'll get more into the PFAS side of things. Okay. If there are any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But I guess, Yongli, we can go back to the last question we had prepared ahead of time. How do data-focused approaches factor into the future of work? And we've talked a little bit about this. And you spoke about your new data tool. But maybe reframing the question, in your work with community stakeholders, when you're bringing data to them and communicating with them, how has those conversations gone? Are there some lessons learned in terms of bringing data to the community? Have you learned more about how to communicate data through that experience? What are some lessons learned from communicating complicated scientific data to a community of stakeholders who maybe don't have the same data literacy that you do?
That's a great question, actually. So that's something I think as a scientist, that's something I have been learning and I'm still learning. We do have some in our project. We do have some like more professional than me in communication to help my work. So I personally just work most on science data, like the field work, collect samples, process sample, analyze data, collect data, analyze data, and then we get help from our communication experts to go out to talk to our community partners or talk to the public. I think one lesson to learn or one experience from our work with community partner, it is how to communicate with public to emphasize the significance of the issue, but not like a overwhelming with fear. I think that's something important. So basically, how to communicate in a positive way with those data. That's something we have been learning. Is because we want to acknowledge those problems there, but we also at the same time we also don't want to cause like fear out there. So I think that's something we have been learning in a communication. And I think another way it is to use some simple message. That's typically, it's actual evidence that's very challenging from scientific community. How to learn, convert those complicated scientific data into some language or some message that is simple and easier to be understood.
Yeah, those are good points.
As I said, I'm still learning. I have been learning a lot. I'm still learning.
Yeah, it's absolutely a different type of skill than I think what most scientists necessarily signed up for. So I'm always curious about how different folks are addressing it, how to communicate effectively and productively, I guess, when trying to work with community members.
Yeah. So just just continue that. Just take some example. We had another project that is a few years ago. That's also about microplastic. When we started that project, not many public realize that concern or realize that problem. So we hosted some like the folks group in like different community. Like one is in metro city area with like basically residents in the city. Another is in more relatively rural area. We host two folks group. So we invite like we send those invitation to those residents in the community. We host like the 20 to 30 people at each time. And we have like a 3 to 5 session in each community. And then we just communicate what's their perspective about microplastics and what they think what they think the concern of microplastic, and then what they think is efficient to address those problems. So after those folks group, and then we have some report, and then we also develop some graphic information. So we have all those materials, like whole packaging, like the public outreach packaging material, include report, lesson to learn, graphic flyer. In our website, if anyone is interested, feel free to reach out to me. I can direct you to the right website. Actually, I can put here right now. I think I can write here.
Thanks.
To outright.
Okay, pivoting back to an audience question that's more high level. Is there a standard definition for an emerging contaminant? Back 50 years ago, we considered VOCs from industrial activities as emerging contaminants. Does any agency specifically define an emerging contaminant?
Yeah, this is a great point. No, I think is the short answer. And I think this is why there's been maybe a shift towards calling them contaminants of emerging concern rather than emerging contaminants, because a lot of these, like we've said, a lot of these have been in the environment or been in use for a long time. We're just now noticing them or becoming aware of them. So I would say, but there's no definition. Loosely, it's just contaminants that we're concerned about and we don't know a lot about, is kind of how I think about them. And there is no organization or government entity that's like charged with defining those.
Has there been a contaminant that is just becomes of concern? Like, is there one where you eventually it's no longer emerging concern? We've learned enough about it that it's now just a toxin that we measure, or are
Just
we
a
not there yet?
regular. I think like, maybe like PCBs or some, things like that, like they've been around a long time. We've been concerned about them for a long time. And we've studied them a lot, and they're no longer entering the environment for the most part. So I guess that would be one example where, we've taken it off the list of emerging concern.
Cool. Okay, this will probably be the last question from the audience. What measurements should be taken into account when sampling for emerging contaminants? For example, PPCP analysis, both in-field measurements and in lab activities. So I guess
I can comment, and PPCP is pharmaceutical and personal care products.
Thank you.
So as far as measurements that should be taken like concurrent with a sample, honestly, I can't think of any measurements that are critical to take at that time in the field. It never hurts to take like water temperature and some basic things like that. But I guess to me the more important thing is things you can do to avoid contaminating that sample. So for example, I've been told when I'm sampling pharmaceuticals and personal care products to you don't want to wear perfume. Some say you shouldn't wear deodorant because it could contaminate the sample. You don't want to have lotions and stuff on your hands. You don't want to wear DEET, which sometimes can be a challenge when you're sampling. DEET is very commonly contaminates samples. It's very easy for DEET to contaminate samples. So I guess that's what occurs to me is more like things that you shouldn't do rather than things that measurements that you should take along with the sample.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also want to add comments about that's water contamination. That's definitely one critical thing. Like plastics, microplastic. When we go out samples, we also recommend try use the container. So for example, you want to grab samples, not to use a plastic container to grab samples. And we're lab coat when we in the lab. And also another thing is I also want to mention for the measurement, it is also always include like validation, like control, negative control, positive control. So like when we do process our samples, we always have a negative control. So basic negative control is basically pure water, goes through the same process, goes through the same collection and storage, sample processing, and the sample analyze processing. So we know if there is some contamination, what's the level of contamination it is there. We also always include in positive control. It is for the methodology we are using, we spike with known quantity of the microplastics. So we know that, all right, how much of those, for example, if we know, all right, we spike 100 particle there. And after all those sample processing and analyzing, how many of a particle we analyze? Do we analyze like 80 or 80% of them, or 70% of them, 60% of them? So I have to say, like the sample processing and analyze validation is also very important. Again, I think for those chemicals emerging concern, and then that's we just started investigate in the past decades or past few years. I think there is still a lot of work to do, like the standardized methods, how to standardize sample process and analytical methods. That's very important. I know there are some government led work is doing that. I know California has been published one sort of standards how to monitor microplastics in drinking water that's above like a 20 micrometer. However, that's all the methods. They have two methods. One is Raman, one is FTIR. That is looking at microplastic larger than 20 micrometer. But for the small microplastic, that's still it's very challenging for the small microplastics because the smaller the size it is, it's harder to detect. And in that saying, that's definitely more work needs to be done to develop those standard methods. I think that's come to the very beginning what we were talking about, the standard method.
Yeah, you've brought us full circle. Yeah, and perfect timing as well. I think it's about time to wrap up our conversation here. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for taking the time to share your expertise. As we wrap up, I do want to leave a plug for the next webinar in the Water Data Forum series, which will take place in November about the US water and wastewater regulatory landscape. Stay tuned for that. And with that, thank you so much for joining, everyone. We had over 100 attendees, so thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for the questions.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for all the questions, and thanks for Julia for hosting this.
Thank you. All right. Bye.